The war between the Relari Dominion and the United Terran Confederation had been raging for months. It wasn't just a territorial dispute. The Relari, an ancient and powerful reptilian species, saw humanity as an anomaly, a violent, unpredictable force that had no place in the orderly galactic community. They had fought countless wars, subdued dozens of civilizations, and ruled through fear and strength. But they had never fought humans before. You are a prisoner of the Relari Dominion. Surrender your mind, and your suffering will be minimal. The words echoed through the dimly lit cell, cold and mechanical. A synthesized voice translating from the guttural, hissing language of the Relari. Captain Elias Vance sat up slowly, rolling his shoulders, assessing his condition. His head ached, his muscles felt stiff, but nothing seemed broken. That was a plus. The last thing he remembered was leading a recon team on Teshair 4 before the jungle exploded into chaos. Relari soldiers, silent, efficient, and in overwhelming numbers, had struck hard. Vance had fought, of course. Fought until he was the last one standing. Then he blacked out. Now he was here, in a cell aboard a Relari warship, captured, restrained, and alone. Or so they thought. The Relari Dominion had perfected their methods of interrogation over centuries. Isolation, deprivation, and psychological warfare had broken some of the galaxy's strongest minds. But Vance was a human, and humanity had a long history of enduring the unendurable. At first, the Relari kept him in silence, assuming that loneliness would drive him to desperation. I think I'll start with push-ups. The guards watching from the monitors outside his cell exchanged glances as Vance dropped to the floor and began a steady rhythm of push-ups. After a few minutes, he switched to sit-ups, then squats, then lunges. Hours passed, and the human kept going, as if he wasn't in a prison, but a personal training facility. "What is he doing?" one guard finally asked. "Physical exertion?" Another responded hesitantly. "Perhaps a ritual for his kind?" Inside the cell, Vance grinned. He knew they were watching. He knew they were confused. And that was exactly what he wanted. Days passed, and the interrogations began. The Relari interrogators, tall, scaled beings with piercing yellow eyes, relied on intimidation and control. But humans were not so easily controlled. They started with psychological manipulation, showing him images of Terran ships being destroyed, of human colonies burning. "Your people are dying," the lead interrogator growled. "You have lost. Accept it." Vance leaned forward, studying the images, then shrugged. "Yeah, I was there for that one. We took out twice as many of yours before we went down." The interrogator's nostrils flared. Next, they threatened him with permanent captivity. "You will never see your world again. You will remain here until you wither away." Vance smirked. "So, free rent? Sweet. Do I get meal options?" By the end of the first week, frustration crept into their tactics. "Perhaps his species does not comprehend fear," one interrogator theorized. "Then we will show him something even his kind cannot endure," another said. They placed him in complete sensory isolation. No sound, no light, no movement. 3 days in utter, unbroken silence. Any other species would have crumbled. The loneliness, the weight of nothingness, would have driven them to the edge of madness. When they finally opened the door, expecting to find a broken man, they instead found him sitting cross-legged, eyes closed, completely calm. He cracked his neck, stretched his arms, and grinned. "That was the best nap I've had in months. You guys should try yoga." The interrogators recoiled as if he had struck them. Their methods had failed. Their prisoner was not breaking. If anything, he was getting stronger. And for the first time, the Relari began to fear what they had captured. Commander Korik stood at the observation deck, his claws tapping against the console. The screen in front of him displayed the human prisoner, Elias Vance, casually leaning against the wall of his cell, rolling a small metal cup between his hands. It had been weeks, and yet the man remained unchanged.
No disper. No desperaschen.
Just patience. Korik exhaled sharply. "This isn't normal. Why isn't he breaking?" he muttered. turning to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Relac. Relac hesitated before responding. "Commander, we have done everything. Isolation, psychological pressure, intimidation. None of it works. He just adapts." "That is not an answer." Korik slammed his fist on the console. "No species is unbreakable. And yet the evidence was undeniable. Every method of control that had been effective on other species had failed on this human. The prisoner had been left alone for days, without sound, without stimulation, and instead of falling into despair, he had emerged stronger, both mentally and physically. His endurance defied logic. His ability to remain unfazed under pressure was unnatural. And now, worse still, he had started spreading that resilience like a disease. "You're making a mistake," Vance said, watching as one of his guards, a younger Relari named Thrak, set a small additional portion of food on his tray. "If your superiors find out you're giving me extra, they'll punish you." Thrak hesitated. I just wanted to see something." Vance raised an eyebrow. "See what? How much a human can eat?" Vance chuckled. "You know, for a species with fangs and claws, you guys are weirdly fascinated by my diet." Thrak shrugged. "You eat more than most warriors. And yet you do not gain unnecessary weight. Instead, you grow stronger." "Why?" "Exercise," Vance said simply. "You break muscle fibers, they rebuild stronger. Repeat enough times, and you get results." Thrak frowned. "That sounds painful." "Oh, it is." Vance grinned. "But it's worth it." Curiosity flickered in Thrak's eyes. "How much can you lift?" Vance smirked. "Why don't we find out?" The first contest was a mistake. Word had spread among the guards that the human had challenged one of them to an arm wrestling match. The Relari, larger and naturally stronger, had been certain of an easy victory. He lost. Vance had used leverage technique, things the Relari had never considered in what they thought was purely a test of raw power. The defeated guard, stunned, had demanded a rematch. He lost again. That was when the challenges truly began. Guards started competing against Vance in endurance tests, strength contests, even simple games of reflex. And every time, the human found some way to either win or make it close enough to be impressive. Whether it was breath-holding, grip strength, or even reaction speed, Vance had a trick up his sleeve. More concerning, though, was what came after. "Why do you fight like this?" one guard asked after yet another lost contest. Vance stretched his arms. "Humans don't fight to conquer. We fight to survive. If we have to win, it's because someone forced us into it. That's not what the Dominion teaches." "Then maybe the Dominion is wrong." The words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been. Some of the younger guards avoided his cell for a while after that, but others came back, asking more questions. And Korik saw the shift happen. "I want his cell placed on permanent lockdown. No more interaction. No more contests." Korik barked, pacing in his quarters. "He is corrupting my soldiers." Relac nodded but hesitated. "Sir, some of the guards have already started questioning our orders." Korik turned sharply. "What do you mean?" "They speak in whispers. They wonder if the war is truly justified. Some say the human's words make sense. That he is not the monster we were told he was." Korik clenched his jaw. "Then find those weak-willed fools and remove them. And if there are too many?" Silence filled the room. Korik knew the answer. He was losing control. "This is madness," one Relari soldier whispered to another as they patrolled the halls. "He's a prisoner. He should be broken, not thriving." "I know," the other muttered, glancing around nervously. "But think about it. He has no weapons.
No allies.
And yet, he stands as if he has already won. What if he's right? What if this war is a mistake?" "Shut up. If the High Council hears you talking like that, you'll be executed." "Yeah? Then tell me this. Why does he fight so hard, but not hate us?" The question lingered, unanswered. Korik was losing patience. He ordered Vance's immediate transfer to a high-security black site, far away from the guards he had influenced. The transfer was planned carefully, with only the most loyal soldiers assigned to move him. The problem? Some of them weren't loyal anymore. As the escort team prepared to take Vance away, an explosion rocked the facility. Alarms blared. A faction of guards had turned. Weapons were drawn. And Vance, still locked in his cell, smirked as the chaos unfolded around him. "Well," he muttered, cracking his neck. That escalated quickly. Korik, watching the prison crumble from his command console, realized the truth. The human hadn't just survived. He had won. The breaking point came unexpectedly, a moment of decision that would shake the very foundation of the Relari Dominion. It started with a whisper, a rumor spreading through the ranks of the prison guards. The human was unbreakable. The human had survived everything. The human was different. "We can't just leave him here," one of the younger guards whispered in hushed tones to his companion. "They'll kill him eventually. And after everything we've seen, does he even deserve this?" His companion, a more seasoned soldier, hesitated before responding. "If the High Council finds out we're even discussing this, we're dead. Humans are dangerous. We were told they were violent, unpredictable. But he hasn't been." The younger one cut in. "He's been patient. He talks to us. He jokes. And he fights only when he has to. What if we're wrong about them? What if this war was never about protecting the Dominion?" That was the thought that tipped the scales. It was a thought that couldn't be ignored. It wasn't just one or two guards, it was many. The way Vance spoke, the way he endured, it made them question everything they had been taught. The rebels devised a simple strategy: disable the security feeds, neutralize key officers, and sneak Vance onto a stolen transport ship. It had to be fast and silent. If they were discovered, there would be no second chance. The night before the escape, the conspirators gathered in a dimly lit maintenance corridor. Their leader, a veteran named Dresh, addressed them. "We do this clean. No unnecessary violence. If we kill our own people, we're no better than the Council. Get in, get the human, get out." "Understood." Nods all around. They moved swiftly, disabling the surveillance grid in the detention sector. A quiet takedown of key officers followed. Stun batons, neural dampeners, non-lethal tactics. Everything was going perfectly, until it wasn't. When the cell doors slid open, Elias Vance sat calmly in the dim light, hands resting on his knees. He raised an eyebrow at the group of armed Relari soldiers in front of him. "Well, this is new," he said, stretching his arms. "Rescue mission? Let me guess. Fan club?" Dresh, still keeping his voice low, motioned for him to stand. "No time for jokes, human. We're getting you out. We have a ship ready. We leave now." Vance didn't move. Instead, he leaned back against the cold metal wall. "Appreciate it, really? But I've got a better idea." The rebels exchanged confused glances. "A better idea? Vance, this is our one chance. If we wait, they'll kill you." Vance smirked. "Oh, they'll try. But here's the thing, you don't need to get me out. You need to keep me in." Silence. "We run now, you're fugitives," Vance continued, his voice steady. "They'll hunt us down, and all we'll do is prove to the Council that humans are a threat. But if we stay, if we turn this prison into a symbol of their corruption, that's how you win a war. Not with an escape, but with an idea." The rebels hesitated. Some of them looked uncertain, others inspired. Vance could see the fire growing behind their eyes. "The Dominion's biggest weakness isn't me, it's fear," he said, standing up. "They rule through control, through obedience. But you're already questioning them, aren't you? What happens when more soldiers start asking the same questions? When entire platoons start wondering if they're on the wrong side?" Dresh clenched his jaw. "You're asking us to fight from inside? That's suicide." Vance grinned. "Nah. That's a revolution." At first, it was only a few guards who wavered, uncertain but intrigued. Then it became a whisper among the ranks. Then, a movement. A few at a time, entire platoons within the prison began questioning their orders. Some started ignoring commands. Others sabotaged the prison's systems in small, almost unnoticeable ways. Doors jammed at the wrong moment. supply deliveries delayed, patrol routes subtly altered. Commander Korik, realizing what was happening, ordered Vance's immediate transfer to a maximum security black site. The rebels barely had time to react before the transfer was underway. "We need to move now," Dresch urged, his voice tight with urgency. "If they get him off-world, we'll lose everything." Vance, standing calmly as restraints were placed on him, gave a small, knowing nod. "Then I guess it's time for Plan B." The moment Korik's men attempted to move Vance, they found themselves facing an unexpected problem. Their own soldiers. Blasters were raised, but the defectors hesitated to fire on their brothers. Shouts filled the corridors as the guards turned on each other, not with violence, but with confusion. Some refused to engage at all. Others stood in the way of the transfer squad, unwilling to attack but unwilling to let them pass. "Stand down. That's an order," Korik roared, his sharp teeth bared in frustration. A younger guard, one who had spoken to Vance many times, met his commander's gaze. "Sir, what if the human is right?" Korik's stomach dropped. The rebellion wasn't just happening, it was spreading. He had lost control. Seeing his forces crumble, Korik made the only choice he could. He turned and fled, desperate to warn the High Council before it was too late. As the chaos unfolded, Vance stepped out of his cell, now a free man, standing in the center of a rebellion he hadn't even planned. He rolled his shoulders, letting out a low whistle. Well, that escalated quickly. Dresch, still catching his breath, looked around at the soldiers who had just switched sides. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. Vance clapped a hand on his shoulder. Things rarely do. Now, let's take this place before they realize what hit him. For the first time, the Relari Dominion realized they had made a catastrophic mistake. They hadn't captured a human prisoner. They had just handed an entire army to Elias Vance. Commander Korik paced in his office, his claws clicking against the polished metal floor. The walls around him were adorned with banners of past conquests, symbols of a dominion that had stood unchallenged for centuries. Yet now, a single human had undone it all. "This is madness," Korik growled, slamming his fist against the metal table. "One prisoner has turned our own warriors against us." The High Council's latest orders flashed on his datapad. Immediate transfer to a maximum security black site. No communication. No chance for escape. Korik exhaled sharply. This time, they would make sure Captain Elias Vance never saw the stars again. The transport convoy was a fortress in motion. 2 heavily armed transport shuttles, 5 escort fighters, and a full platoon of the Dominion's elite forces. Vance was locked in an energy-reinforced containment cell, restraints tightened to their maximum setting. Korik himself had handpicked the escort team, loyalists, soldiers who had served the Dominion without question for years. Inside the cell, Vance sat with his hands cuffed, rolling his shoulders. "So, are we there yet?" he asked, smirking at the 2 guards stationed outside his cell. Neither of them responded. Typical. He sighed and leaned back. "You know," Vance continued, stretching his legs out, "I really hope this place has a decent meal plan. Last time I was in isolation, they gave me nutrient paste. Tasted like cardboard. Still nothing. Tough crowd." Then, just as the convoy reached deep space, everything changed. An alert blared through the ship. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Escort fighters. You are deviating from formation. Identify immediately." Silence. Then, a chilling response. "We follow Vance. The Dominion is corrupt. Stand down or be destroyed." Commander Korik's blood turned to ice. "Impossible," he whispered. On the bridge, officers scrambled to regain control. Displays flickered as ship transponders changed allegiance mid-flight. Korik's loyalists were suddenly outnumbered by defectors. Inside the cell, Vance's smirk widened. "Didn't see that coming," he murmured. The ship jolted violently. A tractor beam locked onto the transport, forcing it into a new trajectory. The alarms grew louder as crew members shouted over one another. Orders were given, but confusion had taken over. Within moments, the ship was boarded. The doors to Vance's cell hissed open, revealing a group of armed Relari soldiers. Their leader, a tall warrior with battle-scarred scales, stepped forward and saluted. "Sir," the soldier said, eyes burning with determination, "you've inspired us. The Dominion is falling apart. We need a leader." Vance sighed, rubbing his wrists as they unlocked his restraints. "You guys really didn't think this through, did you?" The mutiny was swift. The defectors outmaneuvered the loyalists, subduing them with minimal casualties. The transport ship, now under new command, was rerouted to a hidden location within Dominion space. The defectors, numbering in the hundreds, gathered in the ship's war room. Vance stood before them, arms crossed, listening as they explained their reasoning. "We believed in the Dominion's strength," one of the rebels said, voice filled with conviction. "But if a single human could withstand everything they threw at you, what else have they lied about?" Others nodded in agreement. "We were told humans were weak, undisciplined," another added. "But you refused to break." Vance exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. He had spent weeks resisting, surviving, and outlasting everything the Dominion threw at him. But he had never expected this. A full-scale defection. A war within the Dominion. And now they were looking at him like he was the one holding the reins. Vance rubbed his temples. "All right, let's get one thing straight. I'm not your leader." The rebels exchanged glances. "But you have to be," one insisted. "You're the reason this started." Vance let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Look, I was just trying to survive. I didn't plan to start a revolution." The room was silent. Then a young Relari soldier spoke up. "That's exactly why we trust you." Vance's smirk faded. He looked around the room, at the soldiers who had turned against their own government, risking everything because they believed in something greater. Something he had unintentionally started. He sighed. "Well, guess I can't just walk away." "Huh." A cheer erupted from the rebels. And just like that, Captain Elias Vance, a man with no army of his own, no home advantage, and no grand military fleet, had just declared war on an empire using its own soldiers to do it. Meanwhile, far across Dominion space, in the Grand Chamber of the Relari High Council, alarms blared as reports flooded in. A counselor's eyes widened as he read the latest transmission. "The human, he's escaped." Another council member whispered in disbelief.
No.
"He was rescued. By our own troops." Lord Vortak, the supreme commander, slammed his fist on the table, his scaled face dark with rage. "Then we have underestimated him." The chamber fell silent. The war had just changed. And for the first time, the Dominion realized they were facing something far worse than a human prisoner. They were facing a human problem. And it was only getting started. The Relari High Council chamber, a vast and imposing hall of polished obsidian and floating holograms, was in utter chaos. The banners of the Dominion's ruling houses hung from the ceiling, a silent testament to their long reign. But for the first time in history, their power was in question. "Explain to me how this happened," Grand Chancellor Zyron bellowed, his golden scales bristling in agitation. He slammed his clawed hand against the table, rattling the data slates that had been hastily placed before him. A trembling military advisor adjusted his uniform. "The human prisoner, Captain Elias Vance. He has done something unprecedented. Our reports indicate widespread insubordination among our own troops. Sectors once under firm control are now compromised." "Compromised?" Zyron's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "We are not discussing a minor disturbance. The Dominion stands on the precipice of collapse. Entire battalions are defecting. Officers are disobeying orders. And you call this compromised?" Lord Vortak, Supreme Commander of the Dominion's military forces, leaned forward. His red eyes, usually filled with cold calculation, were now filled with something more dangerous: uncertainty. "It is no weapon, no technology that threatens us. It is worse. This is human willpower." A tense silence gripped the chamber. "Human willpower?" scoffed Minister Aratar, the Minister of Propaganda. You expect me to believe that a single member of this upstart species has turned our own warriors against us through sheer stubbornness? This must be some kind of telepathic manipulation. Have our scientists investigated this possibility? Vortak's jaw tightened. It is not telepathy. Our interrogators used every method: sensory deprivation, isolation, fear tactics. Nothing worked. Instead of breaking, he grew stronger. Instead of despairing, he adapted. We threw him into silence, and he thrived in solitude. We showed him destruction, and he laughed, claiming humans have suffered worse. We attempted to crush his hope, and yet, he spread it like a disease among our troops. The gathered counselors exchanged uneasy glances. "This cannot be possible," whispered one of the junior ministers. "No species resists Dominion conditioning. None." A new voice spoke from the shadows. "You should have listened to my warnings." A collective shudder ran through the council as a hooded figure stepped forward. Grand Inquisitor Kales, an enigmatic figure responsible for intelligence and internal security. His voice was smooth, but beneath it was an undercurrent of restrained fury. "I have studied their kind," Kales continued, pacing slowly around the chamber. "Humans come from a world where survival is not granted. It is earned. They have endured ice ages, plagues, global wars, and self-inflicted catastrophes. Their history is written in blood and hardship. Pain is not their weakness, it is their crucible. And now, you see the consequences of underestimating them." Zyron's hands clenched into fists. "Are you suggesting that we surrender? To a single human? Surrender? No. I am suggesting we act before it is too late." Kales turned, his piercing gaze sweeping over the gathered counselors. "If we do not end this now, it will not be the Dominion that survives. It will be a Dominion led by humans." A murmur of dread filled the chamber. The thought was unthinkable. "We have one option left," Vortak announced grimly. "Deploy the Black Talons." A hushed silence fell over the room. Even Kales seemed momentarily taken aback. The Black Talons were the Dominion's most fearsome warriors, genetically enhanced, cybernetically augmented, and stripped of all independent thought. They did not question. They did not hesitate. They obeyed. "That is a drastic measure," Aritar muttered. "The Black Talons are our last resort. If we use them against a single prisoner—" "He is no longer a prisoner," Vortak interrupted. "He is the architect of our destruction." Zyron exhaled slowly, then nodded. "Deploy them. Hunt down this Captain Vance. End this rebellion before it spreads further." A high-ranking officer saluted and left the chamber to relay the orders. Moments later, a new report arrived, one that turned their worst fears into reality. A trembling aide rushed into the chamber. "My lords, he's already here. The humans' forces have infiltrated the capital. The rebellion is no longer at our gates. It is inside our halls." The council chamber erupted into panic. Some reached for their weapons. Others turned to flee. Zyron remained frozen, his golden eyes wide with disbelief. "It's too late," Kales whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "The Dominion is crumbling, and at the center of it all stands a single, unbroken human." As alarms blared across the capital and the once mighty Dominion teetered on the edge of collapse, one truth became painfully clear to every member of the High Council. They had not captured a human prisoner. They had unleashed a nightmare, and now it was too late to stop him. The Dominion's elite forces had finally tracked Elias Vance to the capital, surrounding him and his ragtag army of defectors in the ancient military citadel. The atmosphere was heavy with tension. Towering reptilian warriors in reinforced battle armor formed an unbreakable wall. The air hummed with the sound of energy weapons primed to fire. The Dominion's finest had arrived, genetically enhanced and cybernetically augmented. Their entire purpose distilled into one simple mission: destroy the rebellion and end Elias Vance. Vance stood at the forefront of his gathered forces, scanning the battlefield. The Dominion had numbers, weapons, and overwhelming strength. He had tired defectors, stolen gear, and a growing headache. There was no way they could win in a direct fight. That meant it was time to change the game. Vance took a step forward and raised his voice. All right, listen up. We all know how this is gonna go. We fight, you win, and then you spend the next decade hunting down every single soldier who dared to question their orders. Or we handle this the old-fashioned way. A murmur rippled through the Dominion ranks. Their leaders were confused. The old-fashioned way? One of them scoffed. What nonsense is this? Vance grinned. Single combat. Your best against me. No armies. No slaughter. Just a fair fight. Silence. Then, a deep growl of laughter echoed through the Dominion ranks. A massive Relari warlord stepped forward, towering over Vance by at least 2 feet. His scales were deep crimson, the mark of a veteran who had bathed in the blood of 100 battles. His armor gleamed under the artificial lights, reinforced with energy shields that could withstand heavy fire. You challenge me, human? The warlord sneered. You are weak, small, fragile. This will be over in seconds. Vance cracked his knuckles. Maybe. Or maybe you've never fought someone who refuses to stay down. The warlord snarled, and the terms were set. The 2 armies formed a rough circle, creating an impromptu arena. The Dominion forces were confident. Their champion had never lost. The defectors were nervous. Their leader was just a human. The warlord attacked first, moving with terrifying speed for his size. His claws slashed through the air, aimed at Vance's throat. But Vance wasn't there. He dodged, sidestepping at the last moment. The warlord's strike carved through the ground instead, sending dust and debris flying. Vance danced backward. Fast, but telegraphed. The warlord roared in fury and charged. He swung again, but Vance ducked under it, driving a fist into his opponent's ribs. It was like punching a wall, but the warlord still grunted in pain. Cute, the warlord growled, but pointless. Then he grabbed Vance by the arm and flung him across the arena. Vance hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. He groaned but got back up, shaking himself off. The Dominion forces cheered. Their champion had sent the human flying. Vance wiped blood from his lip. That all you got? The warlord snarled and came at him again, heavier this time, trying to crush him with sheer strength. But Vance had fought bigger things before. He had survived Earth, a planet where even the herbivores could be deadly, where humans had spent millennia evolving not to be the strongest or the fastest, but the most relentless. The warlord fought in bursts of overwhelming power. He relied on dominance, on ending fights quickly. But humans?
Humans endurat.
Vance kept moving. He let the warlord throw his punches, dodging just enough to make them miss but close enough to force him to keep swinging. The Relari began to slow. His breathing became heavier. He was built for decisive victories, not drawn-out battles. The moment his strikes lost speed, Vance acted. He sidestepped another massive swing, then ducked and pivoted, using the warlord's own momentum against him. With a powerful twist, he grabbed the warlord's arm and slammed him into the ground with a perfectly executed takedown. The arena went silent. The Dominion forces stared in shock. Their champion, the strongest warrior among them, was on the ground, winded, pinned beneath a human. Vance leaned down, still holding him firm. Fun fact, humans don't fight fair. The warlord let out a deep growl of frustration, but he did not get up. His pride was wounded, but more than that, something had changed in the eyes of the Dominion soldiers watching. They had just witnessed the impossible. Their greatest warrior had been bested not by brute strength, but by sheer endurance and strategy. A ripple of uncertainty passed through the Dominion ranks. If their best could fall to a single human, then what did that say about their war? One of the Dominion officers took a step back. Then another. Whispers spread. The rigid, disciplined lines of soldiers wavered. Some lowered their weapons. Others glanced nervously at one another. Vance stood tall, catching his breath. You all saw what just happened. Your strongest lost, fair and square. That means, by your own traditions, I have the right to claim victory. But I don't want to rule you. I don't want to fight you. I just want this war to end. More murmurs. The Dominion officers hesitated. Then, In an act that shattered the last of their will to fight, the warlord on the ground let out a heavy sigh and slammed his fist against the dirt in submission. The war was over. The Dominion's forces, once unbreakable, now stood leaderless, their belief in their own superiority shattered. They had seen the truth with their own eyes. Strength alone did not make them unbeatable. Humans were something else entirely, and Elias Vance had just rewritten history without firing a single shot. The Relari Dominion had never known true fear, until now. Their greatest warrior had been defeated by a single unarmed human. Their soldiers, once disciplined and unwavering, now hesitated before every command. Their people, once obedient to the High Council, whispered of rebellion in the streets. The very foundations of the empire were shaking, not from invasion, but because a lone human had shattered their belief in their own superiority. The High Council convened in their grand chamber, surrounded by towering marble columns and the flickering holograms of their fleet movements. Their voices, once firm with confidence, now wavered with uncertainty. "This is an unacceptable disgrace," one counselor hissed, his scales shifting colors in agitation. "A single human has done more damage to us than an entire fleet." Another, a grizzled military strategist, shook his head. "No, not damage. Contamination. Our warriors do not fear battle, yet they hesitate against him. They hesitate because he has infected them with doubt." Silence filled the chamber. The weight of the words was undeniable. The war was no longer just a military affair, it was ideological. And they were losing. Finally, Lord Vortak, Supreme Commander of the Dominion's forces, stood. His crimson ceremonial robe swayed as he fixed his gaze upon the others. "If we continue fighting, we will not just battle humanity, we will battle our own people. Civil war will be inevitable." A tense pause. For the first time in history, the Relari Dominion called for a ceasefire. Aboard the command ship orbiting the capital, Elias Vance sat in a stark white negotiation chamber, his hands folded behind his head as he leaned back in his chair. Across from him sat three of the most powerful figures in the Dominion. Their slitted eyes studied him, searching for weakness, some crack in his confident demeanor. The silence stretched until one of them, a silver-scaled counselor, spoke first. "We acknowledge your achievements, human. We propose terms. A formal surrender. Humanity will be compensated. Our forces will stand down." Vance raised an eyebrow. "That's all very generous. But before I agree to anything, I want something first." The counselors stiffened, exchanging glances. One narrowed his eyes. "And what is it that humanity desires?" Vance leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His voice was calm, steady. "I don't want territory. I don't want resources. I want the truth." The room tensed. "The truth?" Lord Vortak's voice was slow, deliberate. Vance nodded. "Why did you start this war?" A ripple of unease passed between the counselors. One of them scoffed. "That information is irrelevant." "It's very relevant," Vance interrupted. "You threw the first punch. You declared humanity an enemy before we even had a chance to join the galactic community." "Why?" No one spoke at first. Then, at last, Lord Vortak exhaled slowly and gestured toward a holographic display. It flickered to life, showing detailed images of Earth, its vast oceans, its towering mountain ranges, its dense forests teeming with life. And then it shifted to something else. Human history, wars, catastrophes, cities reduced to rubble. Yet every time humanity rebuilt, adapted, grew stronger. "We watched you," Vortak admitted. "We saw what your kind could endure. Your history is not one of survival, it is one of relentless persistence. Your wars, your disasters, any other species would have been driven to extinction. But you thrived." He turned his piercing gaze on Vance. "You are not the strongest, not the fastest, but you are the most dangerous. Because no matter what happens to your kind, you keep getting back up." Another counselor, her golden scales dulled with stress, added in a quieter voice. "We feared that if humanity joined the galactic stage, you would surpass us all. So we struck first. Vance stared at them for a long moment, then let out a low whistle. So this whole war wasn't about conquest. It was about fear. None of them denied it. Then, before anyone could react, Vance reached forward and tapped a small device on his wrist. A tiny red light blinked once, then faded. "What did you just do?" one of the counselors demanded. Vance grinned. "Oh, nothing much. Just broadcasted your little confession to every major system in the Dominion." The room erupted into chaos. Counselors shouted over one another. Vortak slammed his fist on the table. "You reckless." "Me? Reckless?" Vance laughed, standing up. "I just gave your people the truth. Let's see what they do with it." Across the Dominion, the revelation spread like wildfire. Soldiers who had once believed they were protecting their empire now realized they had been fighting a war based on lies. Entire fleets stopped responding to orders. Planetary governors declared independence from the High Council. Civilians, enraged by the deception, stormed government buildings. The once great Relari Dominion, built on centuries of control, was unraveling at the seams. In the streets of the capital, a young soldier turned to his commander. "They lied to us," he muttered, gripping his weapon tighter. "We killed for a lie." The commander, an older warrior, let out a heavy sigh. He looked toward the skyline, where banners of the Dominion were being torn down by angry citizens. And for the first time in his long career, he lowered his rifle. Back in the council chamber, alarms blared as the entire building shook. A junior officer ran in, breathless. "The palace is being overrun. Our own people are storming the gates." One counselor tried to flee but was grabbed by Lord Vortak himself. The Supreme Commander's usual composure had cracked, his eyes burning with fury. "You started this war out of fear of humanity. Now look at us. We were undone not by their weapons, but by a single human's words." Vance, watching the chaos unfold, just shook his head and chuckled. "You all really should have done your research before taking a human prisoner." Minutes later, the doors burst open. Relari rebels flooded the chamber, dragging down the remaining council members. Some were taken into custody. Others were not so lucky. Vortak, still standing tall, turned to Vance one last time. "You have won, human." Vance met his gaze, expression unreadable.
No.
"Your people won. They just didn't realize they were fighting for the wrong side until now." The war was over. Without firing a single shot, Elias Vance had toppled an empire. The aftermath, a most unwanted hero Elias Vance sat in the grand chamber of the Relari Dominion's capital, surrounded by towering reptilian figures. The war was over. He had seen to that. Now, the remnants of the Dominion's leadership, those who had survived the political purges and internal chaos, stood before him, making an offer that should have been unthinkable just weeks ago. "Captain Vance," one of the newly appointed officials began, her golden scales catching the dim glow of the overhead lights. "The Dominion is in disarray. We need stability. We need leadership. We need you." Vance blinked. He had expected some kind of recognition. A medal, maybe. A firm handshake and a thanks for not killing us all. But this was absurd. "Yeah, that's a no for me," he said, crossing his arms. The Relari exchanged glances, confused. "You refuse?" the official asked, tilting her head. "Listen," Vance sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I get it. You think I have the soldiers, the respect, the influence. But I'm not a politician. I'm just a guy who got thrown into a situation way above my pay grade. I didn't plan a rebellion. I just survived it. And now, I'd really like to go home." The Relari murmured among themselves. Most species, when given the chance to seize power, would have jumped at the opportunity. But humans? Humans were strange. This one in particular had dismantled an empire and now wanted nothing more than to walk away. "You would leave the Dominion leaderless?" another Relari pressed. "You're not leaderless. You've got people here who actually want the job." Vance gestured vaguely at the assembled officials. "Me? I want a steak, a cold beer, and a long nap in a bed that doesn't smell like a reptile enclosure." There was an awkward silence before one of the younger Relari, a former soldier who had fought against him before defecting, stepped forward. "Then at least accept our gratitude," he said. "We owe you our freedom." Vance snorted. "You owe yourselves. I just pointed out that your government sucked. You all did the hard part." Despite his protests, the Relari insisted on formalizing their gratitude. They offered him a personal apology for his imprisonment, a massive ceremonial title that he refused on the spot, and a peace treaty between the Dominion and the United Terran Confederation. That last one, at least, he considered a win. But there was one more thing. "The Galactic Council has taken notice of humanity," the lead official said. "They have extended an invitation. Your people will now have a seat at the table." That was unexpected. Humanity had spent years trying to break into galactic politics, but the old powers had always kept them at arm's length. Too unpredictable, too aggressive, too much of a wild card. Now, thanks to Vance's actions, Earth was no longer an outsider. They were a recognized force in the galaxy. Vance exhaled, rubbing his temples. "So, let me get this straight. I got captured, flipped a prison, toppled a government, and now humanity is a galactic superpower." The Relari official hesitated before nodding. "That is correct." Vance laughed, shaking his head. "I really need that beer." The next few days were a blur. Official meetings, speeches he didn't want to give, celebrations he had no interest in attending. Through it all, the weight of everything he had done finally started sinking in. He had walked into an ambush on Teshar 4 as a soldier. Now, he was walking out of the Dominion as something else entirely. When the day of his departure finally arrived, a massive Relari honor guard lined the halls of the spaceport, saluting him as he boarded the Terran diplomatic vessel. The Dominion's new leadership stood at the ramp, watching him go. "We will not forget what you have done for us," the lead official said solemnly. Vance gave her a tired smile. "Try to remember the part where I just wanted to go home." And with that, he stepped onto the ship, bound for Earth. Little did he know, his return would not be the homecoming he had imagined. When Elias Vance's ship touched down on Earth, he expected a hero's welcome. Maybe a speech, maybe a medal, and definitely a well-earned drink. What he didn't expect was to be met by a squad of stern-faced officers, their uniforms crisp, their expressions unreadable. "Captain Elias Vance?" One of them, a high-ranking intelligence officer, stepped forward. "Come with us." Vance blinked. "Not even a welcome home?" Tough crowd. They didn't laugh. Without further explanation, he was escorted from the landing pad, past the waiting crowds, and into a heavily armored transport. The moment the doors sealed shut, the atmosphere shifted. He wasn't a returning hero, he was a problem that needed solving. The interrogation room was dimly lit, the kind designed to make a man feel small. Vance sat in the lone chair at the center, arms crossed, as a panel of military officials and intelligence officers studied him like he was an anomaly they couldn't quite classify. "You understand why you're here?" the lead interrogator, a sharp-eyed general, said. It wasn't a question. Vance shrugged. "Honestly? No. I just spent months surviving alien imprisonment, toppling a regime, and brokering a peace treaty. Figured I'd at least get a vacation first." "Captain," another official cut in, "you turned an entire alien empire against itself. That's not something we can ignore." "Yeah, that tends to happen when they make you a prisoner and you refuse to play along." The general's voice was steady, but there was an underlying tension. "You didn't just survive, Captain. You changed them. You convinced their soldiers to defect, their citizens to rebel, and their government to collapse, all without firing a single shot. Do you have any idea what that makes you?" Vance leaned back. "Tired." No one laughed. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken implications. Hours passed as the questions continued. They wanted to know how he did it. How had he manipulated the Relari? How had he gained their loyalty? Did he use hidden psychological warfare techniques? Did he have an agenda beyond survival? "You've made humanity look like the most dangerous species in the galaxy," an intelligence officer finally admitted. "We were supposed to be the underdogs, the newcomers struggling to earn a place in the galactic community. Instead, the first time a human gets captured, he destabilizes an empire. Do you understand the consequences? Vance exhaled, rubbing his temples. Let me get this straight. You're mad at me for winning too well. We're concerned, the general corrected, because now every major power out there is looking at us differently. Some see us as an asset. Others see us as a threat. You didn't just fight them, you changed them. And that kind of influence terrifies people. Vance sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the weight of their words. He hadn't planned any of it. He had just refused to break. Refused to let them mold him into what they expected. And somehow that had been enough to bring an empire to its knees. Finally, he sighed. Look, I didn't do this on purpose. I wasn't trying to start a movement. I was just trying to survive. And if my existence makes the rest of the galaxy a little nervous, well, maybe that's not a bad thing. The room fell silent. Some of the officers exchanged glances, unspoken debates flickering behind their eyes. Finally, the general leaned forward. So what now, Captain? You could have taken control of the Dominion. You could have made humanity the dominant force in the galaxy. Vance shook his head. I didn't want to rule an empire. I just wanted to go home. For the first time, the tension in the room eased, if only slightly. Then one of the younger officers, clearly exhausted from hours of debate, sighed and muttered, Get the man a damn beer. 2 hours later, Vance sat in a quiet corner of a military station's bar, nursing a cold drink. The chaos of war, of politics, of galactic-scale consequences, it all felt distant now, like someone else's problem. But peace was short-lived. His communicator buzzed. Priority message. He groaned, already regretting checking it. When he read the contents, he thumped his head against the counter. Problem? The bartender asked. Vance sighed. Aliens want me to teach them how to start a revolution. The bartender snorted. Well, did you? Vance stared at his drink, then muttered, Not on purpose. He downed the rest of his beer and flagged for another. Here we go again. The aftermath of the war between the Relari Dominion and the United Terran Confederation sent shockwaves across the galaxy. What had started as a calculated effort to suppress humanity's rise had ended in the complete collapse of one of the most powerful empires in the known universe, not through brute force, but through the sheer stubbornness of a single human prisoner. As news of Elias Vance's actions spread, a new directive quickly circulated among the interstellar community, issued by multiple major factions, including the Galactic Council itself. Under no circumstances should humans ever be taken as prisoners. It will not go well. The declaration became standard military policy across numerous species. Tactical handbooks were rewritten. War simulations now included a new scenario called the Vance Incident, where captors were forced to consider the consequences of taking a human alive. The once proud Relari Dominion, now under new leadership, publicly warned other species against making the same mistake. Even civilizations that had never been involved in the war took notice. Whispers spread that if one human could cause this much damage, what could an entire army of them do? To the rest of the galaxy, humanity had gone from an unknown deathworld species to an existential enigma. No one knew whether to fear them, respect them, or simply avoid them altogether. And Elias Vance? He was finally enjoying his beer. Sitting at a quiet bar in a Terran station orbiting Earth, Vance let out a satisfied sigh. After months of political chaos, betrayals, and the accidental collapse of an empire, he had at last escaped the insanity.
No rebellions. No interrogations.
No desperate factions asking for his help. Just peace and alcohol. Then his communicator beeped. Vance frowned and lazily checked the message. The moment he read the contents, his head thumped against the bar counter. It was from a group of alien rebels. The message was short but to the point. Honored Vance, we have studied your methods. We seek guidance. Our leaders oppress us. Teach us how to do as you have done. Vance groaned. The bartender, a grizzled old veteran, raised an eyebrow. Problem? Vance just sighed, swirling his drink. They think I did this on purpose. The bartender chuckled. Well, did you? Vance took a long sip before muttering under his breath. Here we go again. The Galactic Council chamber was in uproar. Representatives from various species shouted over one another, their voices filled with frustration and concern. We cannot allow this human to keep influencing galactic politics. One insectoid diplomat clicked angrily. He toppled an empire without an army. That is terrifying, a scaled ambassador muttered. A feline-like alien leaned forward, his fur bristling. The humans are unlike any species we've ever encountered. They endure pain, they adapt to imprisonment, and they refuse to be broken. If we do not understand them, how can we coexist? Silence fell over the chamber. Finally, the Relari representative, one of the few survivors of the fallen Dominion's High Council, stood up. You are all missing the point. The problem is not humanity. The problem is that we underestimated them. We assumed they could be controlled like other species. We assumed wrong. The room remained quiet as the implications sank in. Meanwhile, Vance had his own problems. His communicator kept pinging. The rebels, a coalition of different species oppressed by their own governments, had somehow taken his survival story as a strategy guide. Sir, we have begun implementing your techniques. Wait, what techniques? Vance shouted at the message. Physical endurance training, isolation resistance, psychological resilience. We have adapted these methods to our own physiology. Soon, we too shall be unbreakable. Vance rubbed his temples. That's not, look, I didn't, oh, for the love of. The bartender watched with amusement. You're a legend now, kid. No escaping it. Vance sighed. I was just trying to survive. The bartender poured him another drink. And in doing so, you scared the entire galaxy. Congrats. Vance groaned. Next time, I'm just gonna let them keep me locked up. The bartender smirked. No, you won't. Vance took a long sip and muttered, yeah, I won't. Because deep down, he already knew this was only the beginning. Disclaimer. The story you just watched is fictional, created to explore themes of unexpected consequences and the complexities of human behavior. Its purpose is to entertain and provoke thought about how actions can lead to unforeseen reactions, even in the most extraordinary circumstances.